if you look at Chinese press or the Russian, Telegram, all they do is make fun of the American military, right? Right now, they call them the they-them army.
Hi, I'm Evelyn Ray. Welcome to the Caldron Pool Show. Today, I'm super excited about our guest. He is a political commentator. He causes a lot of grief on Twitter, and I'm right there with him. He's a writer and an author, and I'd just love to welcome Ian Miles Cheong. Thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Happy to be on. Thanks for having me.
As I mentioned before we started, you have definitely been a much easier guest for myself because I'm not having to get up in the middle of the night or the earliest hours of the morning to chat to you. But yeah, I really appreciate you coming on and making the effort, and would love to sort of get stuck into a few things. I sort of started to notice you on the Twitter sphere. I'm on a lot of different things, but Twitter is probably where I'm most active. And I remember one day you shared something of mine. I was like, oh, this is pretty cool because you've got a really big following, and I was really interested in some of the things that you had to say. There were some things I disagreed with over the years. I've followed you. Some things I agree with. Lately I've really been agreeing with like a lot of the stuff you've been saying. We're kind of on the same page. But I sort of was hoping you might be able to give people who might not know you, I'm sure most people do, but just a little bit of a background, who you are, what got you into this political commentating sphere, and sort of what you're doing with yourself at the moment.
Oh, for sure. I used to be an entertainment journalist. I used to report on movies, video games, stuff like that, stuff that's of no consequence. And I became, more and more outspoken over the years, maybe over the past, 7 years. Started writing for Fox News's Heat Street outlet, and that's where I got my start. And then, just branched off into politics. Always had opinions on politics, always followed it pretty closely. Definitely got a bunch of things wrong, but, more often than not, got a bunch of things right. And it just, got me to talking more and more and sharing more and more opinions of my own that panned out to be, pretty correct, I would say, in retrospect. So that's why I talk about politics. I mean, it's why anyone talks about politics, right? I mean, you read a bunch of books, you follow a bunch of people, and you say, oh, I've got my opinions. I know why these things are the way things are. And I just, I want to share my opinions, and I think everybody should be allowed to. That's a thing that's becoming increasingly difficult nowadays with cancel culture, with big tech censorship, and so on. I mean, when you're saying the quiet part out loud and you're told to be quiet or else, you'll lose your platform, it tells you that maybe you're doing something right. You're making the right enemies.
And is this something that you've had to sort of, I guess, balance over the years, because you do have quite a large following? Have people tried to censor you? Have Twitter
Absolutely.
And all of the others? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've been banned by PayPal because of my political opinions, and it was a nasty experience. I called them up. I was like, hey, why is my account suspended? And they were like, oh, you know why? What do you mean you know why?
Wow.
Yeah, they were really rude about it too. I mean, there's a bunch of articles about this happening last year when I was censored, and it came as no surprise to me, given that I work for Rebel News, and Rebel News itself has been booted off of PayPal. Yeah.
Was it ever rectified with PayPal, or it was just literally like, you don't get a voice, this is our answer, deal with it?
That was it. Yeah, that was basically it. I mean, when I called the guy, first guy had no idea what I was talking about because it's just a tech support dude. And, I asked to speak to a supervisor, and the supervisor was extremely rude. He made it quite clear that this was about my political opinions without saying so explicitly, right? I was like, is this about my political opinions? And he's like, oh, our official policy is that we cannot comment on why we ban people. That's clearly it was, because it's not like I did anything else. It's not like I used the platform for, any illicit transactions or breached the guidelines in any way whatsoever, apart from its speech policy, its speech clause. So that's why.
Wow. And how does that work? Like, if you have money, because sometimes you can keep your money in PayPal, you can transfer it into your bank account, but a lot of people leave money sitting in there. Was that an issue for you? And do they sort of give you, if they're going to cancel you, do they give you an opportunity to get your funds back, or that kind of goes with the closing of the account as well?
Well, it usually depends on how much money you have in there, and I had hindsight, I knew that this could happen at any time, so I would always withdraw my money. So I had about $30 in there, and they did give me the opportunity to take it out, but it's only $30, so it's not like they could really do anything with it.
Yeah, okay. But I think you hit the nail on the head when you said usually if people are trying to censor you, that's a pretty good indication that you're over the target. I mean, I've seen it over so many issues over the years that I've sort of been commentating online. And, I remember back in 2018, I really spoke about the farm murders happening in South Africa, and my whole Facebook account pretty much got shut down for like 3 months or more. And then when they finally decided to give it back to me, massively shadow banned. And, other issues like the redefinition of marriage in Australia around the same-sex marriage debate, things like that, I was getting heavily censored. Things like the LGBT ideologies in curriculums in schools, I got censored. So usually every time you talk about these things, you get censored, and okay, who doesn't want to hear what I have to say? And there's a quote that I always use, and it's the absence of objectivity in debate that's the language of the oppressor, and it's usually a good indication that there's something else going on. And something that that you've been tweeting about lately, which I wanted to talk to you about on the show today, was Elon Musk. I mean, this is a pretty big issue, and you've been commentating a little bit about it, and I'd love to sort of hear your thoughts on what's going on there. And for people who don't know what's going on, and this is the first hearing of it, if you can kind of give us a bit of a rundown.
Oh, for sure. I mean, so Elon Musk, as we all know, is the world's richest man, and he's a self-described free speech absolutist. And I don't think this is something that he's saying to, promote himself or to just be mischievous. This is something that he has believed in for, I would say, many, many years. And it's quite evident in his own speeches, the way he talks about free speech and why it's necessary for people to be able to express themselves. And, he says it quite succinctly in that free speech is a cornerstone of any functioning democracy. And he looks at Twitter and he sees a platform that has an oversized influence over politics, over social discourse. And if you're censoring speech on Twitter, then you're effectively preventing the conversation about certain topics. They become, off topic, right? It becomes illegal to have any sort of contravening opinion that goes outside of the norm, that goes against the establishment's narrative. And he wants to protect it. And he, unlike other people who simply talk about free speech or talk about wanting to have it, he's a man who, he stands by his principles, right? This is a man who is putting his money where his mouth is. This is a man who, for all intents and purposes, I mean, this is a guy who's palling with the Babylon Beats. It's a satirical website, right? A conservative satirical website that has been censored and continues to be censored by Twitter for making jokes about the transgender Admiral Rachel Levine. And it's of concern that when when people are being banned and silenced for telling jokes, it tells you that they're over the target, that this is something that is off topic, that you're not allowed to talk about unless you have a very specific set of opinions. And that's something that deeply and greatly concerns him. Now, some people might say, well, he's just doing it for clout. I would say no. I mean, if you look at Starlink, which he launched in Ukraine at the onset of the conflict, he was asked by multiple governments, and he even said so on Twitter, and he didn't want to name them, but it's quite clear it's going to be the US government that told him that he needs to censor Russian news sources like RT or RIA. And he said no. He will not censor anyone because that will prevent any sort of discussion from taking place. So he's clearly a principled man. This is not a man who's simply going by what people want him to do. Otherwise, I wouldn't be so mad at him. I mean, if you're looking at his attempt to buy out Twitter, and that's what he's been doing for the past week or so, is that it's come under a lot of fire, mostly from the media, which has expressed all these fears that an oligarch might take over a social media platform, and they don't seem to have any problem when a Saudi prince buys 6% of Twitter, and fortunately he no longer owns that stock, or when China owns TikTok, which is one of the largest social media platforms in the world. They have no problem with authoritarians running the show. But when Elon Musk, a self-described free speech absolutist, steps in and says, I want to protect free speech, suddenly it's dangerous. Suddenly it's like opening Pandora's box. It's like what he's going to do is going to cause danger and threaten journalists. It's going to threaten minorities, but that's clearly not the case.
It's been really like humorous watching Twitter have a meltdown at the thought of Elon Musk purchasing. I think it would be over 50 something percent in the end. There's people saying
100%.
that
That's what he wants. Yeah.
Oh, 100%. Actually,
Yeah.
I did read he wants to privatize it and make it a
He
private
does.
company and things. Yeah. But
Yeah.
there was that talk that he offered 53%, I think it was. And there were all these Twitter people having an adult tantrum saying that they're going to leave Twitter if this happens. And I'm here just going, please,
Please go.
please.
Just
This
leave
is
America like you're going to go to Canada when Trump wins, right? That's the same kind of threat. And obviously, they're not going to act on it. They love their platforms too much, but they think that they have some sort of influence that they can, provoke other people into joining some boycott. But it's about as useful as telling conservatives to boycott Disney. And while they want to do it, they'll still watch ESPN, which is owned by Disney. And it's quite amusing to see. Well, good for the conservatives to actually follow suit. But there's a lot of people who say they want to boycott Disney, but they end up watching sports on the weekend. So, I mean, what is this boycott really?
Disney's been under fire a lot lately. I mean, those of us who kind of, I guess, have seen the underlying agenda for a while, like you watch movies come out and you kind of can see it straight away. But there are still some people who just can't believe that, Disney could possibly create children's cartoons or shows that have all these ideas. I don't know if you saw the recent Disney movie. I think it's called Red Panda or something like that. But it's basically, it's only just recently been released, and the whole thing's got these underlying tones of transgender, and it's based on like a young girl who's like in like middle school or something. Like she's really young.
That's creepy.
Yeah, and the whole idea is like how she transitions into a panda, and so you can see like,
Oh, no.
like you can kind of.
Oh no! It's like Matt Walsh's book, except his was a parody, right? Like,
that's right.
Bunny the Walrus, his great book, and they've done it, but in like the unironic sense that she's going to actually transition, and that's a bit creepy. And I guess the main character is Asian too, right? That seems to be the new thing where they're targeting Asians with this sort of advertising. I saw it recently at Oreo, the cookie company, and they put out this ad about a gay Chinese teenager. And well, it wasn't well received, I'll tell you that. There's not a lot of gay people over here. And it's like, what are you doing targeting minority groups with this nonsense now? I mean, it's bad enough that you've, done this to a lot of white Christian Americans and destroyed, or at least trying to destroy their culture. And now you're doing this to minorities as well. Like, no, thank you. We're opting out.
Yeah, that's it. Tapping out, done.
Yeah.
So you mentioned ESPN. Now, like over here in Australia, we don't really have sports like that. Yeah. So you say that's owned by Disney as well.
Yeah, it's owned by Discovery. Is it Discovery Networks? It's owned by Disney. Yeah, ESPN is owned by Disney. ABC is owned by Disney, and that's one of the most watched television networks in America. I'm not talking about Australian Broadcasting Corporation, by the way. I'm talking about the ABC, right? American Broadcasting Corporation. Yeah. They own a lot of stuff that most people don't even know that they own, right? They're just assuming it's just Disney and it's their parks. And what's funny is they said that going to war with Disney is going to end Ron DeSantis's career as a governor. And it's actually not, right? It's actually backfired because he, if anything, has gained massive popularity with the parents all across the country, not just in Florida. And on top of that, Disney is now pretending that they never said anything about the whole, gender studies stuff in preschools in the first place, because they've lost that argument. They're seeing that parents don't want them to be a political corporation. And I mean, never used to be, apart from, World War II propaganda, but that's a given, right? That's a given.
I think it's really hard at the moment because there's not really many alternatives. I think that, people hate voids. Nature hates a void. And so people need to fill it. So when Disney's not there, or that sort of entertainment, especially for kids, it's like, well, what are you going to fill it with? And, there are a couple of alternative, like there are some Christian sort of applications you can put on Apple TV and things. I think it's called Minno, MINNO. And it's like got Veggie Tales. It's got all of
Veggie Tales. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. The original one's always the best. I was raised on that. Yep. But they do have alternatives, but I don't mean to be someone who's negative, but there really isn't that high quality or that high standard that people want. And so it's, you know, it's necessary that we remove ourselves from these sorts of, I guess, regressive and rotten systems and forms of entertainment. But at the same time, we can't just sort of, yeah, we can't just sit back and complain. Like, we kind of have to point to something better and live something better and create and build something.
Exactly.
You know,
yeah. And that's a problem with like a lot of conservatives, is that they've ignored the cultural space. They pretend it doesn't exist or that it's irrelevant. And people will continue to watch Disney movies. They'll continue to watch Marvel films, which again is owned by Disney. And they'll continue to watch Star Wars, again owned by Disney. And there's no suitable alternatives apart from, say, maybe some old shows like Battlestar Galactica, which is fantastic, but that's just one show, right? People want continuous source of entertainment to consume. And as the late great Andrew Breitbart once said, politics is downstream from culture. And right now, just to paraphrase him, conservatives have lost that space because we've ignored it for so long, and we need to rebuild it. We need to build that space back up. It used to be I would say 50-50 space. I mean, if you look at movies like Red Dawn in the 1980s, any films that were made back then, like Conan the Barbarian, those are clearly conservative movies. The values are conservative, certainly. And we need to bring that back. And right now, there's not much in the way of conservative media, but the Daily Wire, I mean, if you look at Ben Shapiro and those guys, Jeremy Boring, they're building something, right? They're working with Gina Carano, they're working with the VeggieTales guys. They're making their own new show. They're creating a separate alternative platform for conservative media that's not too hyper partisan or cringe. I mean, not a lot of people want to watch Christian movies, and they certainly do exist if you have Hallmark, for instance. People want movies and shows that they can consume without being bombarded with progressive politics. I think that's the big demand. And they want to be entertained without being, given some didactic lesson on why communism is good, actually, right? So it's good that they're offering that. And it would be nice to see that expand elsewhere, more than just movies. I mean, we need to see video games that, don't capitulate to the woke mob. We're seeing a lot of that lately, where the biggest companies in the world are putting woke messaging in their games. And it's clearly having an impact on, young people, because they themselves have come out and said that they don't view entertainment as entertainment purely. They see it as a vehicle for transformation. It's a vehicle for promoting their ideology, their agenda. This is not some, Alex Jones style conspiracy theory. This is stuff that they say out in the open. They're quite happy to let you know that they're using these mediums of entertainment as a political platform.
I think, as Trump famously once said, everything woke turns to bleep. And it's true. You can see it in movies. But what I find really interesting is, I mean, let's take, for example, Charlie's Angels. You look at the original one with like Drew Barrymore and, that sort of Lucy Liu, that sort of era. It got a lot better ratings than the Charlie's Angels that was released with Kristen Stewart, last year. And it's because these woke progressive ideologies are just infiltrating film to the point where viewers at home who, have common sense, logic, reason, rational thinking, they can't relate. And like all entertainment, when you read a book, when you watch a show, when you watch a movie, you want to be able to, as the reader or the consumer of the entertainment, relate to the protagonist, relate to the characters. For example, when I watch Lord of the Rings, like, I look at the characters and I relate to them and go, oh, I'd like to be this person. Oh, I'd like to be that. Oh, I'd like to ride the horse, with Aragorn and fight the bad. And you relate to the characters and you relate to the storylines. And so when these woke progressive ideologies are infecting our entertainment industry, you can't relate to it. And you, as the viewer at home, kind of sit there and you don't enjoy it. But what's fascinating is they keep producing them. You look at the box office ratings and they just keep plummeting. And you're like, how do you have the money to keep producing films that don't do well?
It's ideological, right? I mean, that's how they can afford it. They don't care if it's a money sink for them. For them, it's like public school. You spend money to produce garbage education, and for them, it's a write-off. It's a tax write-off. They don't care. They really don't care. And what's even more amazing is how they talk about representation in films and movies and video games and books and so on. So they keep adding these minority characters that are basically unrelatable. Even as a person of non-white colored skin, as I would say. I would more closely relate to a character like, say, Aragorn than if they made him, somewhat vaguely Asian and completely woke. I don't relate to that. I relate to the character not based on the color of his skin, but by the content of his character. All right. That's how I judge people. That's how any normal person would judge another human being. It doesn't matter if they're black, white, gay, or straight. It's who they are as people. That's how you relate to them. But when they keep trying to make them ideological, they no longer exist as human beings. They exist as caricatures, as projections of the writer's politics, and it is really it really pulls you out of it. It pulls you out of the immersion.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. Speaking of Lord of the Rings, I'm so nervous about this new series that they're going to be bringing out. I don't know if you I'm a bit of a nerd. Power. Just a bit of a nerd, and I've read the books, and it's just so far from reality. Far from reality, and it's just so disappointing because if you look at the reasons why Tolkien wrote Lord of the Rings, it was specifically written for a specific group of people at a specific time in history to relate to them. Yeah, and it's just heartbreaking. But you made a really important point that I wanted to touch on, and that was how culture and politics are so entwined together, and they kind of have a marriage with each other. And it's interesting, not only with entertainment, I was going to say, you can see how rotten our culture is by looking at not just our entertainment industry and where that's going, but by looking at our architecture, our buildings, and how we've lost the...
I hate it.
the beauty, you look at these old churches that were built hundreds of years ago, just the detail, and now you just get these concrete four walls and you slap a tiny little window in there and go, that will do. In fashion, I don't know, you spoke about TikTok before. My goodness, some of the things I'm seeing on TikTok, I'm like, how did your parents let you leave your house looking like that? Come on.
They look at prostitutes, right? Just straight up, they'll use the word sex worker, which is amazing, but they look like prostitutes. They dress like prostitutes. And how old are they? 15, 16? What the hell? Where are your parents? Why is this happening? And they're like, well, my parents don't care what I do. It's and that's precisely the problem. This is fatherless behavior is what it is.
Yeah. Now, I was sort of going to touch on, wrap it all sort of together neatly. You've got culture, you've got things happening with Disney and entertainment, especially things, happening with fashion. And it all seems to really target our youth. It all kind of really targets the young people who are kind of developing. Their cognitive abilities aren't that of an adult. They can be impressionable. They can do these things. And something that I've really noticed they're pushing on kids is transgenderism. And this is something that you speak about quite a lot of. Why do you think they're doing this to the kids? In your opinion?
Well, kids are pretty impressionable, as you said. You couldn't exactly approach a bunch of adults and say you're trans and that you should start questioning your gender because, by the time you're an adult, a grown adult, hopefully you know what you are and that, you're not concerned about how other people perceive you so much. But when you're a child, you're confused. You're going through puberty. Your body's going through some changes. You don't feel comfortable in your own skin. You probably have anxiety. You've probably got depression, especially, after 2 years of lockdowns. These kids have had very little to any socialization. And so they're confused. They don't know what's up. And going after people who are so impressionable, who are so easy to manipulate, and telling them that the reason you're depressed is because you're actually of a different gender is a great way to pull them into this ideology. It's not just, queer theory and gender ideology. It's more so than, it's a lot of different things, right? It's if you can get them to change their genders, to identify as something else, to be perpetually confused and to be unhappy with themselves, then you can basically get them to do anything. You can get them to follow all of your progressive ideologies. I mean, if you look at the vast majority of young people who identify with they, them pronouns, you'll notice a commonality in that, it's not just their genders that are weird, it's everything else about them that's the same, right? They all dress the same, they look the same, they all have piercings, they all have the colored hair, and they all share the same ideology, right? When it comes to politics, they all believe the same things. They listen to the same people. They listen to AOC. They say that we need to, get rid of capitalism, that colonialism was a bad thing, and that, that some, and they repeat the same lies as well about different cultures. They all claim, like they did with that one interview where the black kid was talking to Ben Shapiro, and he was falsely claiming that there are many cultures in the world that are non-white that have a third gender, and that's actually not true. I mean, if you go to Asia and tell them that there's third gender, they would be like, what the hell are you talking about? There's just male and female, right? They won't even know what a gender is. For them, it's just sex. And it's the same with any language that's, that has male and female in it, like Spanish, for instance, or French.
Yeah, I always find it rather ironic when people always say that you have to, gender is fluid and there is no such thing, and then you order a t-shirt and the same company that has put this big virtue signal ad campaign, then you have to select whether you want a male or female t-shirt when you order it for sizes. So I always find those things quite funny to sort of laugh at, and you can't escape it, but they try their best to.
They compare us to fish. And they're like, well, some fish are transgender. They're not really transgender. They undergo metamorphosis, right? And they're fish. We're not fish. We're mammals. We're not like mammals. We are mammals. And you can't put tits on a bull and call it a cow. That's just not how it works.
Yeah, you would think that these sorts of things would fail your basic pub test, but they just seem to. And I think that's why they do attack kids with these ideologies, like we sort of said, because they are easy to influence. And if you can influence them to do that, you can influence them to vote for you and to vote your way. Like you said, they've all got piercings, they've all got certain ideologies, climate change, all these things that they have in common. And most of them would probably all vote for the same political party as well. And we can probably guess.
Yep. They want to lower the voting age, right? Like that's every country that's pushing this, whether it is England or America or Australia, if you look at, the more lefty parties, the Green Party and so on, they want to lower the voting age to like 12 in some places. That's a bit low. It's like these kids can't even decide for themselves what to eat for dinner, and let alone what party to vote for. But there's a lot of bad actors in this as well. It's not just about politics. There's a lot of groomers. That's why, when DeSantis passed his anti-grooming law, a lot of people got really worked up about it, because it meant that they were no longer able to groom these kids into, becoming sexually promiscuous at a very young age. I mean, why would they want this, right? I mean, it's quite obvious why some people want this. It's quite obvious, and they should probably be fed to a wood chipper, if we're being honest here.
Yeah, that's brutal but fair. But I wanted to sort of touch on the whole DeSantis thing as well. Now, he sort of passed that bill, and a lot of people sort of got upset about it. And what I found really interesting was some alleged conservatives also thought it was a bad idea, which confused me, because like you said, who in their right mind, like, according to me anyway, like, would think that it's okay to talk to primary age kids about anything sexual? Like, that to me is very wrong and unnatural. And as you said, the only way you can kind of explain that is because somebody's gaining something from those laws not being there. And you've got to ask yourself the question, why? But were you sort of getting similar reception from things online, with outrage with DeSantis and the bill that he passed?
Yeah, for sure. I had a lot of it. I mean, there were a lot of people saying that the state should have no ability to control what they do in schools. And I mean, it's a very stupid, very simplistic response when people say stuff like that. It means that they don't really understand how government works, how state governments work in America, or how public schools are funded by the people, and the people have elected Ron DeSantis to stand up for parents, and that's why he's doing what he's doing. It's funny because in some other states, you have governors vetoing similar legislation because they're being lobbied by school boards. They're being lobbied by teachers associations, teachers unions that are afraid of losing a lot of power, and that's why they veto these laws. And it's disgusting when they do that. It means that they are no longer representing the will of the electorate, what they were voted in for. They're simply representing the interests of their lobbyists, and that's why they're speaking out against it, claiming that the government should have no say, that teachers should be able to run the place. But you wouldn't say this if it was their own kids. I mean, they certainly have they don't send their kids to public schools. They send their kids to private schools, and yet they want to deprive other parents of having that same choice. These are the same people who oppose school choice. Now, in America, depending on which state you live in or which place you live in, you can send your kids to whatever school you want them to go to. And that is ideal. But in some places, they won't let you. You have to go to the public school that you live in, right? And what that does is it gives the school unions, the teachers unions, an undue amount of power. It lets them do whatever they want and promote a curriculum that is not transparent. In fact, they're fighting against school transparency, against curriculum transparency, because they don't want parents to know what they're teaching their kids. And when you tell me, if a stranger were to walk up to you and tell you that I'm going to tell your child a bunch of things, I'm going to tell him a bunch of secrets, and he under no circumstances can share it with you, I would think that most parents would be very upset by that. And that's exactly what's happening in American schools, where parents have no right in a lot of places to know what their kids are learning. And so, one day their kid comes back home and says, I identify as trans and I'm voting for Bernie Sanders. And you can't even question it. And questioning it is somehow, depicted as child abuse, because how dare you pry into the lives of your children? I guess the teachers own your kids' lives now.
I think we've unfortunately cultivated a culture where the state has become a surrogacy for parenthood. I think that parents, at a very young age are dropping their kids to daycare and living that narcissistic sort of selfish life where they get to have their career and don't have to worry about their kid. The kid's an inconvenience. And I think it's a really regressive rotten sort of ideology that unfortunately has plagued our family unit. And, I've said this before and I've copped a lot of slack for it, that, daycare is a surrogacy for motherhood. It's really sad. People have kids and then send them off to the state. Vodi Borkham is a famous minister who was over in the States, and he once said something so incredibly accurate, which was, you can't continue to send your kids to Caesar and wonder why they come back to you looking like a Roman. And that's unfortunately exactly what we're doing with our kids. We're sending them to Caesar and then they're coming back, like you mentioned, and saying, Mom, I'm a transgender and I'm, going to vote for Bernie Sanders. And it's like, well, it kind of is your fault. You did that. You sent them into the devil's hands. Of course, they're going to go into these sorts of things. So I think we really need to shift our focus as a culture, as human beings, to one, not see our kids as an inconvenience, but see them as a joy. And we need to promote child rearing again. We need to promote raising our kids and being their primary. If you can't home educate your kids, and you still need to be their primary educator. You need to be going to school going, what's in the curriculum? What are you teaching? You're teaching that on this day? I don't want my kid. I'm bringing them home that day. Parents need to start really getting involved before they lose their kids. They do. There was a study that was done over here in Australia where they threw all these young kids into a classroom situation as young as 4, and they wanted to sort of test the waters to see where kids' loyalties were. And they figured out, they did all these social experiments, that at age 4, children can form loyalties with their school classmates over their parents at home. Wow. And they started noticing behaviors in children where they would get in trouble, and the kids were starting to lie for their classmates at early as 4. And they sort of came to the conclusion that if you don't have your child's loyalty by the time they're like 4 or 5 and they're going to school, chances are they're going to find loyalties with their peers over you at home. And that's a really scary thing, considering the peer culture and what's going on in schools. So parents really have to pay attention and be vigilant and tenacious more than ever before, because of, unfortunately, the world that we're exposing them to. But I want to sort of segue that into sports and transgender. This has been something that's a fun one. Yeah, going on a lot lately. We're seeing high school girls who are crying because they're missing out on college opportunities because that spot's been taken by a biological. Like
in swimming, there's 16 spots, right? 16 spots, and each of those students is going to get a scholarship. And if you put a boy in there, then one girl means that one girl got, she got left out.
What did you make of all that situation with the swimming pool and
Elias Thomas? Yeah. How we pronounce Thomas's name. I think it's really bad because, obviously it's really bad because you wouldn't put men in women's sports. So men by far, have like a 20% advantage, a physical advantage over women. That's undeniable. That's just in the differences of our, our hips, our pelvis, our heart size, our lungs, our, lung capacity, our bone density, and so on. So that alone would, should preclude male-bodied athletes from participating in women's sports. It's as simple as that. But now, because of wokeness, we are supposed to ignore biology. We're supposed to ignore the anatomical differences between men and women. I mean, it's a joke, and it's really dark. But like let's say 500 years from now, archaeologists are going to be digging up corpses. They're going to be digging up bodies of males and females, and they're not going to be able to identify your preferred pronouns when they dig up your body. You're just going to say, oh, this was a male or this was a female. It's going to be as simple as that,
Yeah.
And so this idea,
as simple as that. Yeah.
Yeah, this idea that men and women are the same, that we're built the same, is clearly not true. It's unfair to women. It disadvantages women, and there's a reason why sports are segregated by gender. It's not because of sexism. It wasn't the reason, although they will claim it is the reason now. They'll say they wanted to keep women down. But have you ever seen a woman win a men's sport? No, it's always the other way around. You don't see, women participating in American football or rugby, unless it's women's rugby, because they just have no chance of competing against men. It's as simple as that. So this idea that we need to erase all of this reality, all of this biological reality is just absurd to me. And a lot of people are seeing it. And, people who live outside of Western culture are certainly making fun of it. If you look at Chinese press or the Russian, Telegram, all they do is make fun of the American military, right? Right now, they call them the they-them army. They see them, these transgender officers, and they think to themselves, oh, we're going to lose a war against these people? I don't think so. These are not serious people. These are people who are concerned with these are men who are concerned with putting on makeup and wearing skirts. I mean, we're not going to lose to them. It's a joke.
I think when everything happened with Russia and Ukraine, they showed a comparison of the Russian military ad versus the American military ad. And you have to look and is this satire? Is this real? And it's like, when you realize, oh, this is real, you go, we're in big trouble. We are in big trouble, and they know it. And we are the laughing stock. But even though we laugh at it and it's a bit of a joke and it's a bit embarrassing, it's actually just sad when you think about it, because it's dangerous. It's dangerous. Look at the UFC fighter, how she got her skull cracked, completely fractured because
by Fallon Fox, right?
Yeah, that was horrible. That was actually really shocking to sort of see and to sort of watch that. And it's only going to get
bragging
worse.
About it on Twitter. Fallon Fox is bragging about beating up women on Twitter and saying, I beat up TERFs. Like, okay, so you're a guy who's bragging about beating women and people are cheering you on because you're transgender, you identify as trans. Like, what the hell is this? It's insane.
And what I find fascinating is, I mean, there's no denying that gender dysphoria is something that a small group of people do suffer from. But I think if you look at the statistics in the UK alone, isn't it like an increase of 400 or more %? It's something outrageous, the increase. And you've got to ask, like, surely, like,
it's like 30,000%.
Yeah, it's outrageous, the increase.
It's a cluster too. It's like they've done studies on this on transgender clusters where kids come out in mass as trans, and they found out that it's a pure cluster. It's not people suddenly deciding that they're trans. Well, it is actually. It's how they decide it, right? They call it a rapid, acute gender dysmorphia, right? Or gender dysphoria, sorry. And they're doing so in groups of clusters, right? In clusters of people, I should say. And the reason for that is because it's peer pressure. That's all it is. When you have a bunch of kids in a single classroom or school that is promoting this stuff and embracing it, and they're all watching the same media, they're watching the same YouTube influencers who are telling them that being trans changed their lives and made them happier people, or that being trans means they're more interesting people, like they get to identify as whatever, they get to carry rainbow flags. And what kid doesn't find a rainbow very, very pretty compared to, the gray and white drab flag that they give cisgendered kids? They tell them, choose a flag. They're going to go for the rainbow one. So of course they're going to start identifying as transgender. They're going to identify as gender queer. And parents, some parents are woke. They love having, a child that is different from the others, because that way they can, promote their child, parade them around as an extension of themselves, of their wokeness. They're like, look at me, I'm raising a trans child. Gives them an identity because they're very boring people. And so it is disturbing that that this has become a psychic contagion, as Carl Jung might have called it. It is a psychic contagion. That is what it is. It's not, it's hysteria. It's a form of hysteria. It's not something that's really medical. It's not like these kids have been drinking something that's been put into the water that made them this way. No, it's peer pressure. They're breaking out in clusters. Why else?
I think we're yet to see the long-term effects of everything, to be honest. I think that this is probably going to go down as one of the biggest medical negligence episodes in our modern history, that as well as the forcing of COVID mandates. But those two things, like we've got a pretty rough sort of future ahead, I think, with the repercussions, because if you look at the statistics alone based on transgenderism in youth, I think it's if a child transitions before the age of 25, it's over a 70% of regret once they hit.
Yep. Detransitioning is a thing. Yeah,
it is. Yeah. And people don't want to talk about it. People, you're not allowed to talk about it. There are many people who have transitioned and then gone back to their biological sex, and they're not allowed. They're shunned by the community. They're not allowed to talk about that part of their journey. And I guess the earlier that these kids are going, it's like we don't even know where this is going to lead. It's already like, if you look at suicide, depression, mental illness, all these things, they're at an exponential rate. And so you got to ask the question, like, yes, like we need, like you love your child, right? Yeah, and as a parent, you never want to lose your child, but at the same time, why would you wish this upon your child? Because it is a life where they have such a higher chance of being miserable. And these are statistics that are collated after a transition, so they can't use the excuse of, oh, it's because no one accepted me what I wanted that I'm depressed. This is statistics after a transition. Yeah, and it's actually heartbreaking.
Swedish foundation.
Yeah.
Right. A Swedish foundation found that there's a very high incidence rate of autism comorbid with a diagnosis for gender dysphoria, right? So basically these are kids who are confused. They don't fit in. They're very socially awkward. They don't fit in, into their peer groups very well. So they embrace these identities to try to be different, to try to explain why they're feeling this way, why they feel like, they're missing out on friendship groups and so on. They're just awkward kids. I mean, 20 years ago, they would have been tomboys if they were girls, right? They would have been the girls who like playing boys sports. There would have been the girls who like playing video games. And now if you're a girl who likes playing video games, they're like, are you trans? There's always going to be somebody who tries to convince them that they're trans. If they're not, cognizant enough of what is happening to them, that they're being groomed, then they will just go along with it because they want to fit in, right? They want to feel like they belong. I've seen this happen on Reddit, where there are these communities that basically groom young teenagers, and the way that they communicate to these teens, because they shouldn't be using this platform to begin with, but they go on there and they're like, I'm confused. I don't know how to feel. I'm not sure if I'm a boy or a girl. And the replies are always like, so, let's say it's a boy, right? Or let's say it's a girl. Let's say it's a girl. And they'll say, hey, dude, how are you? And they'll be like, what do you mean? And it's like, how did me calling you a dude make you feel? Did it make you feel comfortable? And so the child is going to be like, yeah, it made me feel different. It made me feel welcome, because usually people, objectify me for being a girl, and suddenly they feel like a boy. They think this is what being a boy is like. And if they're a boy, they feel like a girl because some guy they're trying to groom them is going to ask them how they feel like being called Miss. So obviously they feel special. They feel like, oh, this is different, so they're being groomed for that. And what's worse, when we talk about a medical malpractice, for instance, they claim that puberty blockers are temporary. They're not permanent. They don't have any repercussions. That's not true. They do damage your bones. They give you osteoporosis because it cuts off. I mean, if you're a boy, it cuts off your the testosterone into your system. It damages you permanently. And if you're a girl, it makes you sterile, right? It literally prevents your uterus from developing. So it is a permanent, I won't call it a solution. It's the opposite of one. The fact that this is being promoted to kids as a sort of temporary measure is disgusting, right? Because a lot of these kids, as you mentioned earlier, when they do transition later on, they're stuck with a lot of the boyish traits that they acquired when they were on testosterone, right? Not only were they on puberty blockers, they were taking hormones that gave them facial hair, that gave them a lot of facial hair. Their bones are different. Their bodies are built different now, and they're like an in-between, but yet they are biologically female. And for the rest of their lives, they'll have to live with the fact that they have a deep voice, they look like men, they have beards, and they'll never be able to feel like a girl ever again, even though they are actually girls. And it's sad to see so many young people have to live with this decision because a doctor or a surgeon or a psychiatrist told them that this was the solution to all their problems.
Yeah, it really is heartbreaking. And we sort of spoke before about how parents just have to be involved. And I think, parents are afraid that if they're too involved, they're going to push their kids away. But it's like, what's the alternative? You want to get to a point in your life where, you look back with no regrets, and you will always regret not being involved enough in your children's life, in their development, in rearing them, in forming their souls. You'll never regret that, but you'll always look back and regret not doing that enough and losing them to these ideologies. So, the family unit is massively under attack from every angle possible. And this is the time when we have to protect that family unit, our children, and that's because when you have a strong home, you have a strong nation. And unfortunately, people who are trying to attack and break the home know exactly what they're doing. It's all deliberate. It's all doing by design.
It's to destroy the nations. It's to destroy, it's to destroy the idea of a nation state. It's to create globalism, right? It's the Great Reset, right? That's what it is.
Yeah. I wanted to sort of touch base with you on the Ukraine and Russia sort of thing, because, it's funny. I've said this before, but as I get older in my years and as things in life happen, the circle around me is getting smaller of people who I find I'm like-minded to. The circle around me is kind of, as each new thing comes, I'm like, well, bye-bye, I respected you once, I don't really respect you again. And COVID was a big one. Like I felt like I lost a lot of respect for people that I once did respect. And I've kind of come to the realization that we've obviously always lived with this many idiots. We've just never been tested at this sort of length before. And I feel like the Ukraine-Russia thing has just been another one of those things that's sorting the wheat from the chaff. I don't know what you're seeing from your end, but I'd love to hear.
I'm seeing the same thing. Oh, for sure. I mean, anytime I see someone who I used to respect put the Ukraine flag in their profile, I'm like,
no,
he's going to say something incredibly stupid. Oh, no. He's just going to regurgitate the Daily Mail, some British tabloid about, Russian war crimes or something. And I'm sure they're happening, but not to the extent that everything Ukraine says is true. The ghosts of Kiev, the Snake Island soldiers, all those turned out to be hoaxes. Bucha, another thing, it's like, I guess it's too fresh to talk about, but it's fascinating to see people simply regurgitate everything they read in the Ukrainian press. And obviously it's being regurgitated by the New York Post, by the Daily Mail, by the Telegraph, and so on. And they're doing so uncritically. I mean, these are the same people who, just 2 years ago were questioning the words that were coming out of Dr. Fauci's mouth. They're like, don't trust that man. He's lying to you. The media is lying to you. And now they're like, the media's totally telling the truth. It was Russians, it was evil war criminals, it was orcs. Putin just wants to eat babies. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, what? Where's this coming from?
Why do you think there's so much censorship around it? Because I actually spoke to somebody at length on one of these podcasts about the whole Russia-Ukraine sort of debacle. And it's interesting learning about the context. It goes back to 1907. But if we talk more recently, like I think 2014 was a pretty pivotal point in everything.
Euromaidan. Yep.
Yeah, and I think
the US-backed coup. A US-backed coup.
The
Victoria Nuland.
But no one wants to talk about it. No, we're not allowed to talk about it. And I remember even just suggesting it. It's like, you're a Putin puppet. And I was like, what the heck does that even mean?
What does it even mean, right? Yeah.
And you've got people in Australia, like all the way over here, saying we're not allowed to call our product in one of our supermarkets, the chicken Kiev. We're not allowed to call it that anymore.
It's the chicken Kiev now. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just like, it's unbelievable.
God.
Just I think there's a real spiritual blindness, unfortunately, plaguing sort of a lot of people. But why do you think we're not allowed to talk about it? Like, what do you think that they have to gain from censorship?
Okay, so I mean, I'll give you a multi-pronged answer here. But first of all, people have embraced this idea of Ukrainian nationalism as a sort of what would you call it? A surrogate for their own lack of nationalism, because you're no longer allowed to say America number one, or that I love Australia. Like, you're no longer allowed to say that without being maybe thinking of yourself as a racist, perhaps, right? Because you're promoting colonial values when you say I love Australia, or that Australia is number one. A lot of people don't want to say that anymore because it's become kind of taboo to say stuff like that. And they associate the people who wave Australian flags or American flags with MAGA, with insurrectionists, with bogans. That's how they look down on these people. These liberals look down so much on anyone who has any sort of nationalistic value. So, but there is that earnest desire to be nationalistic. That's why people root for their favorite sports teams. That's why they watch Marvel movies. They love having a villain and a superhero. They want people to root for a team they can chant for. And Ukraine is that team. Ukraine is presented by PR companies, by the way, as a sort of underdog in this war, right? That Zelensky is Captain Ukraine. That he's a superhero. He's a man standing up for his country. He's a brave man, and he's fighting against the evil Putin war machine. So they want that. They want that story, that fairy tale of good versus evil. So in doing so, they completely ignore all of the war crimes that Ukraine has been committing on the people living in the Donbass. For instance, for the past 8 years, since 2014, they have been committing, I would say, systemic genocide against Russian people in the Donbass, right? They've been killing them, shelling them, murdering their kids, raping their women, and so on. And this is all completely well documented. This is not some Russian disinformation. This is done by the United Nations Office of Human Rights at UNHCR. It's very well documented. There's hundreds of these cases. People have come out with testimony, with graphic footage, with evidence of war crimes. And that's all being ignored. It's all being swept under the carpet right now. Now it's as if none of that ever happened. And the Azov Battalion, which is a Nazi group, which is part of the Bandist, the Banderite movement in Stepan Bandera in Ukraine, who was a Nazi, by the way, they are being whitewashed. They're being presented as heroes, that they've got a far right past, but they're moving away from it, according to some publications, right? And these are people who openly display portraits of Adolf Hitler in their offices. These are people who wear swastikas as tattoos. These are people who brag about killing civilians, and somehow they're the good guys. These are people who were, exiled from Russia and Belarus for being war criminals. They were exiled for being murderers and killing people. And now they're heroes in Ukraine, and we're supposed to kiss their asses because they're the good guys, according to the media. And so when people speak out against it, when I say the things that I say, people want this to be silenced because it goes against their narrative of good versus evil. It destroys their image of an underdog Ukraine that's just defending itself, that they've done nothing wrong. They're just poor people just like us. They're normal people just like us. And I would say that the civilians definitely are. The civilians are the victims of all of this. But to whitewash Ukraine's own atrocities, its military, its corrupt politicians, because Ukraine is barely even a state. I mean, it was founded in 1992, and since then it's been run by oligarchs. This is not some, long-lasting democracy that has a massive history of a republic behind it. No, this is a place that's run by corrupt rich people, really. And so when you say these things, they want you censored because it's the truth. They're afraid of it. They can't take it. They can't have their illusion of Ukraine destroyed. And it's the same thing with masks, for instance. It doesn't matter how much evidence you show. Britain recently put out a study showing that the efficacy of masks in schools was minimal to non-existent, right? And you show this to them, and they'll want to censor you, even though it's the government itself is telling you these things don't work in schools. They still want it because it destroys their idea of the truth. They want to cling so much to their belief system. It is a belief system. It's not just an understanding of things. It's a belief system that in order to deal with the cognitive dissonance, they would rather silence anything in opposition to that.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, like, as Western nations and as people, we like to have these talismans, these magical things that make everything better that actually don't. And I think mask wearing is just as helpful as wearing a rabbit foot around your neck. And this whole thing with Russia and Ukraine, it's like, it absolutely mind boggles me that people still won't look, even though all these things like Snake Island have come out, even all these things about, the ghost of Kiev have come out, people still are going to bat for Ukraine. And I'm not saying that I'm going to bat for Russia, because I'm not going to bat for Ukraine. I'm on the side of humanity, but I'm on the side of, I don't want any innocent lives from either side to be affected by this.
By the Ukrainians, right? Everybody talks about Russian war crimes, and I'm sure some of it exists. I mean, there's a lot of people there, right? But when Ukraine does it, people are actually justifying it. There's a video, and this is very widely documented by the New York Times itself. Went there and got all this information. And it was about them shooting Russian POWs, killing them, executing them, torturing them, and executing them. There's video of them castrating Russian soldiers who have surrendered. And people are not just denying it, they're justifying it. They're saying, oh, it's war. These things happen. Or that it's not a war crime. Russia didn't declare war, so it's okay to do this to Russians. Like, people are willing to set aside their humanity just to promote this idea that their side is good, because they cannot reconcile the fact that maybe their governments, maybe the side they've been rooting for, are not good guys after all. They don't want to be perceived as the bad guys. I mean, this is when there's like a psychological effect. I forget what it's called, but people tend to believe what they believe based on like their first impressions. So the first impressions matter. If their first understanding of a situation establishes itself in their minds at the start, that's what they'll believe forever and ever. It doesn't matter how much information you provide to them that's, contradictory to what they believe. They'll continue to believe that nonsense because they just can't cope. They're not smart people. These are not smart people.
Yeah, I certainly hope that the spiritual blindness starts to sort of cease, because we need more than ever people to be spiritually alert to what's going on, so we can kind of get through this mess and into better times. But I wanted to sort of touch on, just sort of to sort of wrap it up on the hour, I guess, I wanted to sort of finish by talking about political commentary. I mean, we've been talking about Russia and Ukraine, but I live in Australia and you don't live in Russia or Ukraine. And, we've spoke a lot about things going on in America. And I sort of said this to you before we started. I get criticized sometimes on Twitter and on social media for daring to speak about issues that aren't on my own soil in Australia. And I know that you cop similar sort of criticism online.
Mostly because I'm not white. If I was white, I think I only see half of it, to be honest. Yeah. Liberals are the most racist people on the planet. I swear to God. They're like, you're a race traitor. Why aren't you woke? Like, do you think all Asian people think alike? And have you met any Asians who you actually think were woke? Seriously?
I find it's usually the people that have to yell the loudest to get their point across that are probably, probably suffering from whatever it is they're yelling about themselves. So my nan used to say to me, if you have to say that you're a lady and make a point that you're a lady, you're probably not. And so I grew up with my nan sort of saying that to me, as in like,
that's so
like
transphobic. Oh no. You can't put lipstick on a pig and call it a lady, right? That's just not how it works.
But how do you sort of deal with that? Like what would your response be to somebody who says you have no business talking about American politics or Ukraine and Russian politics? What would your sort of response be to that?
Be jealous. I'll tell them, just be jealous that I have more influence than you do. The fact that I live all the way here and people listen to me, that's gotta piss you off, doesn't it?
It's a pretty simple response. It's a good one. I usually like to come back to people and say, well, if America goes to war, my brother will probably have to go fight in a war. So that's why I'm interested. If I ever, have a son one day, he will have to go to war because we're all allies. And unfortunately, at the moment, with the way the world's going, it is one big global melting pot that we're all kind of being thrown into. So
I don't
one
think
of
you need to
this-
justify yourself to them, because they're
Yeah.
not arguing with you in good faith. They just want to shut you down. So you should just shut them down in return. That's my policy. I don't like justifying myself to anybody unless I respect them, right? If I respect somebody and I know they're doing it in good faith, then of course I'll justify myself. But when it's coming from random people or people I don't respect at all, who I know are just trying to get a rise out of me, I'm like, it's sad that I know more about American history than you do. I'll tell that to them, like the fact that they try to correct me and they're totally wrong. It's just sad. It just says a lot about them more so than it does about me. The fact that they need to call out where I live to sort of like dismiss my opinions says that they're unable to do so on the merits alone, right? On the points, because they don't have any.
That's probably a really good point to wrap it up. I would like to finish by giving you an opportunity for people who do want to follow your work. I highly recommend it. I've always enjoyed following you. I've always respected you. As I said, I don't always agree with you, but I respect you.
It's healthy. It's disagreements.
It is,
what
yeah.
would it be if we all agreed with each other? We'd be just like the left, right? You're not allowed to disagree. Otherwise, you'll get canceled, like Russia was canceled. It's good to have disagreements. It means that we're able to explore our ideas. It means that we're able to challenge ourselves. I mean, what fun is it if everybody tells us you're right. It's like, no, sometimes I'm wrong, and I want to be told I'm wrong. I want people to explain to me how I'm wrong. Do it point by point, and I will concede if I am wrong. Absolutely.
It's all about growth and development. And as human beings, we are constantly growing. It's a sanctification process. Like we're becoming hopefully better people with more goodness in us as we go along. And we do have to be wrong at times to learn and to move forward. But I really appreciate you coming on. It's been lovely. I'd love to have you on again sometime.
Absolutely.
We can talk about other things. But where can people follow you? Can you sort of give them your social sort of handles?
Sure.
And yeah.
2 places for now: on Twitter at Still Gray, and on Telegram, because just in case I get censored, you can follow me there at Culture War Room. That's one word: Culture War Room.
Awesome.
Posting. Yep.
Well, thank you again for coming on tonight. I really appreciate it, and all the best. And we'll keep stirring up the pot on Twitter together, I'm sure.
We'll shake those eyes, let them drop. Hell yeah.